Betrayal didn't break me, it made me stronger. See how I turned my pain into overcoming. My name is Luciana, and for a long time, I thought my life was almost perfect. I had a stable marriage, a planned pregnancy, and a peaceful home. At the time, I was working from home as an administrative analyst, which helped me take care of the house and also my health, since the pregnancy wasn't the easiest. My husband, Ricardo, always bragged about his time in college, the friendships he maintained, and the epic moments he claimed to have experienced. I listened fondly, because I always thought it was beautiful that he cherished good memories. My parents, Marilia and Carlos, were incredibly present and supported me in everything, which made me feel like I had a solid foundation. Early in my pregnancy, I felt very tired, had severe nausea, and needed to take partial bed rest. Even so, I tried to keep the house tidy and be a present wife. Ricardo, on the other hand, gradually began to withdraw. He claimed to be very busy at work and some weeks was spending more time outside than at home. But the final straw came when he told me about a reunion of college alumni. According to him, it would be a whole weekend at a country hotel, exclusively for former classmates. I thought it was strange, but I didn't want to be that suspicious wife, so I simply asked him to enjoy himself. What I didn't imagine was that that weekend would be the beginning of my greatest disappointment. While I was lying awake nights with back pain and heartburn, I saw some friends commenting in groups that certain posts on Ricardo's Instagram were quite suspicious. I checked, and to my surprise, not only was he hanging out with his college crowd, but in several photos he appeared alongside Fabiana, an ex-girlfriend he claimed to despise. Worse, some posts were in romantic settings, with captions that had nothing to do with simple friendship. My world fell apart right there. I couldn't understand how someone who claimed to love me could do this to me, precisely when I was at my most vulnerable. I cried myself to sleep, woke up with a swollen face, and yet I did everything I could to maintain my routine, thinking about my baby. The next day, I took a deep breath and decided not to confront him right away. I needed proof. I needed to understand what was really happening. That's when I remembered Gustavo, Ricardo's childhood friend, and one of the few people in his circle who always treated me with respect. I sent Gustavo a discreet message and asked to talk. To my surprise, he called me right away and got straight to the point. He knew about Ricardo's escapades, lies, and even past betrayals I'd never discovered. According to Gustavo, that alumni reunion was just an excuse for Ricardo to spend the weekend with Fabiana, who was recently divorced and had been flirting with him for months. My blood boiled, but at the same time, I felt relieved to finally be waking up to reality. From that moment on, I decided I would no longer accept living a lie. Gustavo helped me gather screenshots, audio recordings, and even old conversations where Ricardo admitted to friends that he was only with me for convenience and the support he received from my family. My heart ached, I could barely eat, my stomach churned, but each test gave me strength I didn't even know I had. My mother, Marilia, was my rock. She took care of me, prepared my meals, and reminded me every day that I didn't deserve to go through this. When Ricardo returned home, feigning exhaustion and satisfaction with the reunion, I had already made up my mind. I was cold and silent, hanging on his every word. He suspected nothing and even had the nerve to tell me he'd spent the weekend remembering us. At that moment, I knew for sure, either I put an end to it or I would be completely destroyed, emotionally and physically. I waited for him to fall asleep, snuck my phone, and transferred everything I needed to my computer. The night was long, but it was the first step toward my liberation. With all the evidence in hand, I arranged a lunch at my parents' house and told them everything. My father, Carlos, was outraged. My mother cried with me, and for the first time, I didn't feel alone. They helped me find a lawyer specializing in divorce and pregnant women's rights. I was advised not to confront Ricardo directly until everything was resolved legally. In the following days, I continued living as if nothing had happened, but inside, I was rebuilding myself. I knew the battle would be difficult, but for the first time in months, I felt strong. I never imagined I'd have the courage to remain calm in the face of someone who was so blatantly cheating on me, but I did. Every morning was a challenge, but I looked at my belly and remembered that now I wasn't fighting just for myself, but for my son. Ricardo continued to act normally, even more attentive than before, probably trying to compensate for his guilty conscience. While he tried to maintain the facade of a good husband, I moved forward with my lawyer, gathering documents and evidence, and initiating the legal process for separation. Gustavo continued to be a key player, always willing to help. The hardest part was dealing with the psychological manipulation he tried to use when he realized I was becoming more distant. He started with emotional blackmail, saying I was cold, that the pregnancy was changing me, that he missed me. Then came the attempts to destabilize me, saying I was paranoid, that I was making things up because of my hormones. At times, I almost fell into these traps, almost convinced myself I was exaggerating. But whenever doubts crept in, I would look at the evidence I'd gathered and remind myself of the strong woman I was becoming. When everything was ready, I finally spoke to Ricardo. I didn't yell, I didn't cry, I didn't ask for explanations. I just said I knew everything, that I had proof, that I already had a lawyer, and that the divorce was a sure thing. He tried to deny it at first, then downplayed it, until he finally exploded, accusing me of destroying our family. But the tables were turned when I informed him that not only were my parents on my side, but even his own parents, Teresa and Jose, had become aware of the evidence and were horrified by his behavior. I'll never forget his face when he realized that not even his own family would defend him. I never had high expectations of my in-laws, but what they did for me at that moment was a positive shock. Teresa called me crying, apologizing for everything I was going through and saying she didn't know her son's true nature. Jose, who had always been more reserved, clearly stated that he was on my side and wanted me to have peace during the pregnancy. That gave me even more strength to move forward. It wasn't just my family supporting me. Even his family had seen his true colors. Ricardo, desperate, tried to convince me to get back together, using everything: gifts, loving messages, promises of change, and even Fabiana was summarily discarded as if she'd never existed. But I'd already suffered enough. There were nights when I cried with rage, others when I felt relieved. It was an emotional roller coaster, but with each passing day, I realized how much easier life without him was, how the peace of mind I was experiencing was something I hadn't experienced in a long time. For the first time, I looked in the mirror and felt proud of the woman I was becoming. The legal battle wasn't easy, but I had a strong team behind me. My lawyer was impeccable, and Gustavo was a key witness throughout. We managed to expose every lie, every betrayal, every manipulation. And most importantly, I secured all the rights my baby and I had, both financially and emotionally. The judge was firm and clear in protecting a pregnant woman who had been the victim of emotional abuse during her relationship. I left the courtroom with tears in my eyes, but they were tears of relief, of victory, of freedom. From then on, I began to rediscover the real Luciana, the Luciana who laughed, who made plans, who believed in herself. I started therapy, took care of my mental health, and decorated my son's room with the help of my parents. I found joy in the little things, in drinking coffee in peace, in hearing my mother hum while helping in the kitchen, in receiving a supportive message from Teresa, my former mother-in-law who never abandoned me throughout the process. Life was far from perfect, but it was real, without lies, without masks. The birth of my son was the definitive milestone in my transformation. When I held him for the first time, I understood the reason for every tear, every pain, every struggle. It was for him and for me. I promised him at that moment that he would never live in a toxic environment, that I would always see his mother as a strong woman, capable of fighting for her own happiness. Ricardo didn't show up at the hospital, didn't have the courage to look me in the eye. And honestly, I didn't miss him. For the first time, I felt complete on my own. The months that followed were challenging, of course. I had to relearn how to live without that companion by my side. I had to understand that solitude was much better than the company of someone who hurt me. Each stage of my baby's life was a personal victory. Each smile felt like a reward for the sleepless nights. And the tears shed. My parents were incredible. They were with me all the time, and even Teresa and Jose continued to call and visit, insisting on being a part of their grandson's life. And I let them, because I knew they weren't to blame for their son's bad choices. Over time, I returned to working remotely, with more flexible hours, balancing everything with motherhood. I felt proud when I realized I was handling everything without having to humiliate myself, without having to accept crumbs of love or respect. Gustavo remained my friend, and over time, our friendship transformed into something lighter and more sincere. It wasn't romance. It was support, affection, a genuine complicity that helped me see that good people still existed. I let time guide everything, taking my time, focusing on what really mattered, me and my son. One of my greatest achievements was realizing I no longer needed anyone's approval. Not Ricardo's, not even those who always doubted me. I learned to be self-sufficient, to value my strength. I started taking better care of my body, changed my style, updated my wardrobe, and took on small projects at home to transform the space into our own. And each small change was like lifting another weight off my shoulders, like opening the windows of my life to allow freedom to enter. I won't lie and say I never cried again. I did. Sometimes I found myself remembering the lies, the humiliation, the loneliness during pregnancy. But today I understand that crying is part of the healing process. The difference is that now I no longer cry out of sadness, but out of gratitude. Gratitude for having gotten out in time, for having people by my side who didn't let me fall apart, and most importantly, for having rediscovered myself as a woman, as a mother, as a human being. Ricardo tried to reconnect a few times, but I kept my distance. Over time, he completely lost touch, partly because his own family realized who he really was. Fabiana disappeared from his life. From what I learned, she was just another victim of the illusion he peddled. Today, I look back and no longer feel anger, but pity. Because I was able to break free, I was able to evolve. He remained trapped in his own web of lies, while I flourished. The greatest gift of this journey was seeing my son grow up in a loving home, without yelling, fighting, or manipulation. I became an independent woman, someone who knows exactly what she deserves and what she will never accept again. I learned to value my peace above all else, to prioritize my well-being. I was given a new lease on life, and I grabbed it with all my might. And if I can leave one message for anyone reading this, it's this: never settle for less than you deserve. No one has the right to destroy your self-esteem or steal your peace. Today, I divide my routine between work, motherhood, and self-care. I have true friends, people who respect me, a relaxed relationship with my family, and an immense love for my son. I don't need great luxuries or social status to be happy. True wealth is peace, being able to lay my head on the pillow without guilt, without fear, with a peaceful heart. And no lie, no betrayal, no man in the world can take that away from me. I'll end this rant by saying that I'm living proof that life can begin again. That no matter how difficult it may seem to leave an abusive relationship, it is possible to start over. It is possible to be happy alone and rebuild everything from scratch. The Luciana of today is much stronger than the Luciana of the past, and if I could do it, any woman can too. The pain is temporary, but the freedom, that's forever.